I've been feeling a little crazy recently, possibly gotten really into patterns and equations. Do you feel like your home has too many doors or more doors than it used to? You may have met the Spiral. Today we're going to be talking about the Spiral from the Magnus Archives, an audio drama by Jonathan Sims and the Rusty Quill Network. If you're interested in more of an in-depth conversation about the series, go watch my other videos on it. But this one is about the Spiral. And if you don't know what that is, then this is your spoiler warning to leave and get out of here, listen to the whole series, and come back. I'm going to be talking about everything, not talking about the Magnus Protocol because I'm talking about the Magnus Archives, so... So the Spiral is one of Smirk's 14 entities. Technically, there's maybe 15, but it's kind of debated. But Smirk's 14 is a categorization system designed by Robert Smirk to separate out the 14 main fears of the Magnus Archives series. I'm gonna list off 15 fears, but the 15th fear is kind of debated on whether or not it's actually emerged yet. The 15 fears: the buried, the hunt, the end, the extinction, the corruption, the eye, the lonely, the slaughtered, the web, the end, the desolation, the dark, the stranger, the flesh, and the vast. But today, we're talking about the Spiral. I am kind of later on going to get into the entities and fears the Spiral's related to, because this is an emotional concept of fear. So the lines get blurry sometimes. It's just how it is. So on the Magnus Archives wiki, the Spiral is described as this. The Spiral is one of the entities. It is based on the fear of madness, that your world isn't right, that your mind is lying to you. It deals with deception, lying, deceiving the mind and senses. The Spiral is associated with fractal patterns, hallucinations, doubt of sanity, impossible geometry, maddening realms and dimensions, doors, and mazes. I feel like the Spiral was the first fear that I kind of understood. It feels strange to explain it, but at the time, a lot was changing around me and I had a lot of big decisions to make. The whole getting lost in your own mind aspect of the Spiral felt almost comforting. The fact that the Distortion, Michael, Helen could embrace that madness and change and almost become the power that it brought was something that I needed at the time. I feel like when a lot of people think of the Spiral, the first thing you think of is madness and the second thing you think of is lies. But I don't think that's super true. I think madness is definitely a huge key element in the Spiral, but I don't think that lying is. And we're gonna kind of go into why. So there's a bunch of episodes that are designated to the Spiral. You can go on the YouTube playlists and find them. You can listen to the Q&As to figure it out. There's Spotify playlists that break everything down too on the official Rusty Quill Network. That's how I found everything. And also there's some listed on the wiki, but the first one we're going to talk about is one that's listed on the wiki in a Q&A and not in the official Spiral playlist, so bear with me. This is my favorite episode, and that is why I'm including it. So episode 65, Binary, is categorized as a Spiral episode on the wiki and was confirmed to be written with the intention of being a Spiral episode in a Q&A. I didn't write down which one, and I forget. Binary is the story of a woman who comes across a chatbot on the dark web and decides to have a conversation with it. This chatbot is an urban legend called Sergei Ushenka, and as she's chatting with this chatbot, things start to get a little strange. The chatbot turns into a video, and that video takes over her computer, almost burning itself into the screen, forcing her to watch it. This video is very disturbing, and it's Sergei Ushenka, or presumably Sergei Ushenka, eating his computer piece by piece. The statement giver is forced to watch this video for 17 hours as it appears on every screen that she looks at. It does not appear to the people around her, making her seem crazy. A lot of this episode deals with that madness, both in the sense of Sergei Ushenka going mad trying to preserve his brain into a computer, as well as the victim going mad, watching this video play over and over, leading to isolation and forcing her to watch this video. It's argued that this statement is an extinction statement, but as I believe the power of extinction hasn't fully emerged, I think that it can fall under the spiral as well. There's no blatant lie or mistrust here. A delusion and a fear, most definitely. A feeling of badness, but no lie. What she was seeing was real to her and it drove her mad. This statement also appears around the time in the series where John is severely paranoid of his staff, so the themes of the spiral fit well within the narrative. This is a great episode to kind of show that these fears do have a lot of overlap, and they're not exactly straightforward. They can be super straightforward, but by saying that there's only one fear in this episode would just be wrong. These things get blurry. It's really hard to pick apart each and individual thing. You can kind of apply more than one fear to just about any statement. Many of the statements of the spiral deal with the domain snatching people or attempting to lure people into its corridors. Some of them get to leave, maybe just to find their way back in, but some of them are trapped forever and eaten. This hallucination seems to only appear to the victim and not to other people, and often lures them into their domain, which appears as a door that was not there before. It's maddening and makes you question all of your own beliefs. Again, not fully lying to you, but making you do all the work on that front. The spiral forces you to question everything you've known, and if you fall victim to the curiosity of what lies beyond comfort, then you may fall victim to the spiral. Many of the people affected by the spiral are people who have a set way of living, though. Take Father Burrows, for example. He was a devout priest, one who traveled the UK until settling down in 2005 to train as an exorcist. He's featured in episodes 8, 19, 20, and is mentioned in episode 59. Burrows is connected to a few supernatural events in the series, one of the events taking place at Hilltop Road. He had been sent by a nurse to complete an exorcism in the home after a worker there ran into a debatably, maybe not, possibly alive, possibly dead, Raymond Fielding. The construction worker there, Eva Lensick, may have already had ties to the spiral, only being exacerbated by the location of Hilltop Road and it being a crack of reality and all. Eva Lensick's father had gone mad and devoted himself to fractals, claiming the man with all the bones in his hands was following him. This is how the entity of the spiral has been described before, and due to the connection with fractals, I feel like it's safe to say that this is the same being. The Distortion. Although we don't know if the Distortion at the time was Michael, because I don't know what year Michael got eaten by the door. We'll talk about that later. While Burrows is performing this exorcism, he's hit with a great heat and pain, eventually being compelled in some way to say, "I am not for you, I am marked." By what? It's not the most clear in this episode. While there was heat, mention of a girl with brown pigtails, Raymond Fielding feeling compelled, the apple from the tree outside, and all of that, the priest is still marked by the spiral, not the desolation and not the web. I believe this has to do with his faith and his connection to it. So let me just yap philosophically for a minute because I think it's relevant. As a devout Christian, Father Burrows was deep in Christianity. We know this. He's a priest and trained to be an exorcist. That means he's probably spent a long time with the church. When you're devoted to one way of living, you can find yourself in an echo chamber. Echo chambers happen when insiders come to distrust everybody on the outside of their ideology, worldview, or power structure. I think the spiral can really latch on to these types of people who have secluded themselves from the outside world and devoted their life to one thing and one thing only. There's similarities between the victim in Binary and Father Burrows. They've devoted themselves wholeheartedly to their profession. The woman in Binary is constantly surfing the web and on chatbots, saying that she didn't even have time to update her blog with how invested she's become in it. Where Father Burrows is deep and devoted into Christianity. There's a similarity there. The thing about these echo chambers is when you're exposed to other thoughts, ideas, and actions, it can make you feel crazy. Better yet, if your reality in these echo chambers started to shift, you may also feel crazy. I feel like many victims of the spiral are more likely to become trapped in these small, echo chambery type places. So we've got the Mark of the Dread powers on one man, possibly being passed to another, exacerbated by the location of the event being at Hilltop Road in like 2006, maybe? Cool. In 2009, probably, Burrows performs the exorcism of a young woman in university, having a hard time separating reality from fiction. After the incident, the young woman ends up in the hospital where she's unresponsive to Burrows until she says to him, "It wants your faith." Then she dies. After this incident, he feels guilty and confesses to another priest in confession. His fellow priest, however, acts differently and spoke all of the sins that Burrows had made since he was 6, ones that he had already repented for. He fled from the church, eventually being found by a man who told him it was time for mass. His perception of reality is all over the place. There are no people, and then the room is filled with people. Anybody who speaks only produces the sound of a clanging bell, and the Eucharist is not the right texture. Oh, it turns out that was someone's face. Father Burrows gets sentenced to jail for unaliving 2 students and removing the face of them. He decides to take no further action, not wanting to complete any more sins, pleads guilty to all charges, and ends up in jail, stating that still, the priests and anyone who talks to him produce the sound of that bell. You see, I feel like his reality is very easily distorted due to his devotion and knowledge of the church. He was able to have this full-on hallucination of being at Mass and doing things that he would do at Mass, some of which actions in his delusion lined up with what was happening in reality. However, not everything lined up perfectly. So now that we've kind of talked about what the spiral is and how it affects people, let's talk about the distortion itself. The distortion is also known as the man with too many bones in his hands, Michael Shelley, Helen Richardson, or the throat of delusion incarnate. This being is both an identity and a concept with no clear dividing line between the two. Michael felt closer to the idea of being the distortion, however still partially identified with being Michael Shelley. It's fueled by its hatred for the former archivist Gertrude Robinson after being manipulated and lied to by her. Gertrude Robinson tricked Michael Shelley into becoming the distortion in order to stop the ritual that it was putting on, forcing him into the corridors with a map so he could find the heart and destroy the being of the distortion. Basically, she sends Michael into the corridors in order to give the spiral an identity, something that it conceptually has a hard time having anyways. So by giving the distortion an identity and a name, it gets confused and stops the ritual. Presumably. I don't know. That's what I came to. That's the conclusion I made. Michael Shelley preferred to play the long game with his victims, as seen with Paul and Marcus Mackenzie in episodes 27 and 146. Michael tormented Marcus for years and eventually tormented his father with a similar idea until he passed away from a stroke. His son Marcus was taken by Helen after she took over the identity of the distortion. So now that I brought up Helen, let's talk about her. Helen was a woman who came to give a statement to the Institute after she was trapped in a maze of corridors while giving a tour of a home. She was a real estate agent, meaning that a lot of deception and lies already regarding homes, living, and prices. She frantically tries to draw a map, but it's never correct. It can't be. It's impossible. She's a mess and in shambles over the instant. When she goes to leave after giving her statement, she leaves through a door that was never there, once again landing her in the spiral. John feels really connected to Helen at this point because of her paranoia and delusions. He's also incredibly paranoid during this part of the series, leading them to have this strange, comforting connection. Eventually, Helen takes over as the distortion. Like we talked about earlier, Michael was fueled by his hatred of the archivist and the dirty tricks they must play for both the sake of their patron and for knowledge. Gertrude had tricked Michael into becoming the distortion in order to interrupt a ritual. Michael was never meant to be the spiral, but became it when he found himself at the heart of the maze. He grew into his role and tried to get back at the eye with his new powers. Helen, on the other hand, was taken by the spiral after already leading a life of deception and lies. So Michael Shelley was deceived into becoming the spiral, where Helen had spent her life being the deceiver. She grew into this role. We see this throughout the series. Helen starts off unsure about her new role and powers, feeling uneasy about taking people into her corridors. But slowly she becomes more confident, using her friendly demeanor to deceive people into trusting her more than they should. A really telling line about Helen comes from the end of the series, and I feel like it explains the spiral a little bit more. John's able to smite Helen at the end of the series. He talks to Martin about his reasons for doing so, saying that she wasn't ever lying, and she did want to be their friend. She just didn't want to be a good friend. She wanted to have an edge on people, wanted that leg up. Her goal was to be just trustworthy enough so that when she pulled away and didn't help, it hurt and made her victim scared. In my opinion, I feel like the spiral is the first fear that you're kind of able to understand in the series. Sure, the eye is something that's very easily understood because it's what's running the Institute, but other than that, I feel like the spiral is something that's very relatable. Also, from lurking online, it seems like a lot of people start off with the spiral being their favorite. I think many human beings at some point or another have felt like we're going crazy. Whether that be from a life-altering event, everyday stress, or really anything that negatively impacts your life and changes things. It's easy to feel like the reality you have known for so long is disappearing into thin air. The fears, the powers, they don't just make you afraid. I think Melanie does a really good job at explaining what happened after the ghost bullet got removed from her. As much as the bullet was making her more vicious, it was making her feel right about things. It was harboring all those negative feelings into one place and making her feel better about them. And I think a lot of people find comfort in the spiral in the same way. I think that all of the fears have some sort of relatability like this. I personally find myself more drawn to some fears than others. Throughout my time enjoying the show, my favorite fears have changed depending on where I'm at in life. When I first started the show, I had just transferred into a new college, and I was a little unstable. I found a lot of comfort in the spiral, and it was my favorite power. This idea that this entity could embrace change so easily and almost wasn't affected by big changes, embracing reality-altering events and everything like that was comforting. I'm at a different point in my life now, and as much as I love the spiral still and all that it brings, it isn't my favorite entity anymore. If you're curious on what is, my favorite entities are the End and the Buried right now. So a lot of the entities in the Magnus Archives have overlap and are related and have opposites. I found a couple of charts on Reddit and on Tumblr that I'm going to put up that I use to help me make my own chart. So I really liked this table right here. I'm going to put it up. This is by user DJTilapia, made on the Magnus Archives subreddit. There's also this post from user centrumluminia regarding the fears related entities and opposites. There's two charts. You can pause if you want to look at them there. But I made my own chart. So we're going to talk about my chart. So I've listed all of the fears in this chart out in a nice little circle, but kind of sectioned off areas and some groups of the fears that I think are related together and have like overlapping themes. I've also made each opposing fear opposite from one another, but I have this spiral across from the web. Why? So if you think about it, the spiral and the web are pretty similar, but they're also incredibly different and opposite. The web is all about order and control and making you feel like things are normal when they're actually not, whereas the spiral is more about chaotic control, making you feel like everything is going wrong and you have no control over your life. It's a little confusing to make exact opposites for emotional constructs, if I'm being honest, and I really struggled a lot with making this chart. This is like the 10th rendition and I have spent too many hours on it, and at this point this is as good as it's gonna get. Like I said, I feel like the web and the spiral could be super close. That can be said for like all the opposites. Honestly, like the vast and the buried are both about insignificance, and the eye and the dark are both about the unknown. So, like, yeah, they're opposites, but they're also like exactly the same thing. It's an emotional construct. I don't know what you want for me to do. We're human beings. We're made up. I've also positioned the spiral next to the dark and the desolation, with the next items being the vast and the stranger. I think these four fears are closely related to the spiral in many different ways. The spiral takes what your life once was and turns it around, like the desolation. You can't imagine the horrors of what's lurking behind a door that was never there, and that's the dark. The immense, impossible size of a maze and corridors is the vast, and the lies and manipulation of a person who's distorted is kind of similar to the stranger. So it has like some related qualities to other things. It's really hard to just section off one entity as being something and nothing else. Like I said earlier, emotional construct, I don't know what to tell you. We know the spiral and the eye were in conflict for a while due to Michael Shelley's hatred of Gertrude. And we also know that Michael was actively trying to stop the corruption by helping the Institute. So we know that, like, maybe those are also kind of opposites. I don't know, that's why they're next to the web on my little, so like it goes like eye, and then web, and then corruption. You know, I feel like I'm gonna talk about them some other time. We're talking about the spiral right now. The distortion, all in all, is not just about lying. It's not about lying at all. It's about manipulation, mania, and the unknown. We can see this more towards the end of the series with the way that John defeats Helen, when she really and truly lies. Throughout the series, she never actually lied to our crew. She would simply omit the truth or flat out refuse to say anything. When she told John she wasn't scared of him, she lied, and that broke through the mask that she'd built up. And John tore right through her. The spiral is a really interesting, really confusing entity. Most of the fears are, though, honestly. It's fear. I do think that covers most of what I wanted to talk about regarding the Spiral and the characters Michael and Helen. I really enjoy Michael and Helen as characters. They're really fun to imagine in my mind, and I don't know, I think they're cool. I really like the way that the voice actors portray Michael and Helen. You kind of feel on edge talking to them, and like you shouldn't trust them, but that you want to trust them. I really like Michael's laugh. It sounds like a quiet laugh that you turned the volume up on. I think that's a really interesting way to portray this manipulative guy. The episodes relating to the Spiral are always so strange and trippy and interesting to imagine. Like, just trying to imagine the corridors is so strange, but kind of cool. If you think I forgot anything important about the Spiral, feel free to let me know in the comments. I probably did, because I got confused writing the script a couple of times and had a hard time contributing everything that I felt like I needed to. If you did enjoy the video though, consider liking, maybe even subscribing. I'm gonna be making more videos just like this one regarding more entities and avatars, and eventually I'll talk about the Magnus Protocol, I swear. I would love to hear what you want to hear about next, so let me know in the comments. I hope you have a good day, a good week, good month, life. And if no one else has told you this today, I love you and I'm proud of you. Bye. Every time I record, I get like 20,000 emails. Like, for what? Lipstick. I think I'm gonna put lipstick. Yeah, next to that, where I put on big earrings. I could put on a second pair of, no. The buried, the hunt, the end, the extinction, the corruption, the eye, the lonely, the slaughter, the web, the end, and the desolation, the dark, the stranger, the flesh, and the vast. I don't think I can read. And oh my god, I'm so proud of this. This is the longest run-on sentence fucking ever. This is really confusing. The Spiral is very confusing. Harboring that madness and finding it empowering rather than finding it... What's the other word for empowering?